Hello! So I thought it'd be fun to take a look at the use of the Minimoog in Bob Marley's classic Stir It Up, specifically the 1973 recording. Let's take a look. Stir It Up was originally released by Bob Marley and the Wailers in 1967 with a different arrangement and more of a rocksteady feel. Now, Johnny Nash was an American who'd moved to Jamaica in the 1960s, and he met and befriended Marley and went on to work and tour with him. Nash recorded a cover of Stir It Up in 1971, which charted, including in the US, in 1972, perhaps influencing Marley's decision to re-record and re-release the song himself the following year as part of the album Catch a Fire. And it's that version that is the famous one. In the run-up to this album, Marley and the Wailers were struggling financially and didn't even really have the money to get home from Europe where they were working, and so in stepped Chris Blackwell of Island Records. Blackwell is a Brit who'd moved with his parents to Jamaica as a child and had lived there for many years and set up Island Records whilst there. Returning to England, he maintained his passion for Jamaican music and started importing and releasing it, so he was a pretty ideal collaborator for the band. Blackwell advanced some £4,000, around £45,000 in today's money, so that the band could get home and get in the studio. Marley then returned to the UK with the main recordings, and despite a dispute with CBS over the ownership, which Island Records won, Blackwell and Marley were able to get in the studio in the UK to mix the record, but also to record some overdubs, which Blackwell believed would help sell the album to an audience that was used to rock and not reggae. This included slide guitar, clavinet, Hammond organ, and of course, a Minimoog. One of the session musicians who was brought in was John Rabbit Bundrick. Like Nash, Bundrick was from Texas and had played and recorded with Nash, including on his biggest hit, I Can See Clearly. Bundrick also worked with Nash and Marley on a film soundtrack whilst they lived in Sweden, and on his website he has some photos of that time and an account of Marley magically showing up at their home to work on the project in 1971. Bundrick had subsequently moved to London, which is where the overdub sessions for Catch a Fire were taking place, and so he was an ideal candidate in the right place at the right time. In the Classic Albums documentary series from 1999, Bundrick gives his account of how Marley instructed him to play Hammond organ and clavinet in a style he was unfamiliar with, and it was, of course, Bundrick who is credited as playing the Minimoog part on Stir It Up, which we're going to look at. So let's set up the sound. So you can hear that he's playing chords. How's he doing that on a monophonic synthesizer? Well, because there's 3 oscillators and you can tune the pitches of them independently, tune up a chord that runs paraphonically through the synth. The only problem being that you can't change the intervals within that chord very easily on the fly. You'd have to be retuning it. But this song is 3 chords, 1, 4 and 5, that are all major chords. So it just happens to work. So oscillator 1, we've got 8 feet, a square wave. Oscillator 2 is at 4 feet, but also tuned up a major third. Sounds like the Venga bus. And then oscillator 3 is also at 4 feet, but it's at pitch. So you've got like a root, then a major third up an octave, and then an octave. And those 2 are sawtooth waves. Then let's come over to the filter. So the keyboard tracking is on, so the cutoff will follow the keyboard control voltage. Let's shut it pretty much all the way down. Then bring up the filter emphasis or the resonance to about 6. And you're starting to hear that sound. So let's just turn on decay. So on the Minimoog, you've got attack time, decay time to a sustained level. And then by default, if you let go of a key and then end the gate, it just stops. But if you switch on decay, it then returns to the decay time for a release stage. So it's a shared decay release. So we've got a filter envelope attack time of about 2 seconds. So it rises up. Then we've got a decay time of just less than 1 second. So it decays down to a sustained level of about 4. So we've got a rise and then a down to a sustained level. Then when we let go, it will decay. The attack, decay, and sustain and release on the amp are 0, so the amp opens immediately, a decay of about 5 seconds, and a maximum sustain level. And then it's all about how much filter modulation. So, not enough, way too much, it's somewhere about there. And then the last thing is to add a gorgeous reverb. Now, they originally used a plate, I believe, but I'm going to use a vintage spring. Let's set that up. Okay, the spring reverb is active. Let's have a listen. And you can play with the how much modulation there is. Keep it quite soft. Maybe a slower decay. And it's just it's a beautiful sound. It's so tastefully done, and it just sits in the back of the track. Yeah, and it's just a really great use of a Minimoog. So there we go, the Minimoog and Bob Marley. I hope you found that enjoyable. It's just a really lovely sound, isn't it? It kind of somewhat reminds me of like steel drums in terms of how it sits in a mix. I know it's not that kind of tremolo sound, but it has that kind of vibe to it. It's really, really lovely use of the Minimoog. If you like that sound, I have sampled a bunch of chords, both major and minor. Sounds like this. That's available on my Patreon. Thank you to my patrons for their ongoing support, and thank you to you for watching. The last thing we're going to do is a little abridged cover of Stir It Up. Cheers.